Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jason Mozo, the Senior Vice President for the Florida Chamber Safety Council, and I want to thank you for taking the time this morning and joining us. Today's webinar is focused on the recent changes to OSHA's HAZCOM standard, which came into effect on July 19th. Leading this webinar, we have Ed Falk, the former head of OSHA and member of the Florida Chamber Leadership Cabinet Advisory Board. We know that you will be walking away with valuable information in order to keep you and your employees safe in the workplace and your organization in compliance with these new standard updates. The Florida Chamber Safety Council was launched in the summer of 2020 with the mission of making Florida the safest, healthiest, and most sustainable state in America. We are grateful to our advisory board of leading statewide companies for providing us with the best practices and helping to make Florida a national model for workplace safety. The Florida Chamber Safety Council recently launched our new online heat safety platform, which comes at a perfect time with OSHA's recently released proposed rule for heat safety. Our new platform, which we worked closely with by several local and nationally recognized experts in safety and health, is a comprehensive toolkit of resources, including heat stress prevention strategies, real-time weather monitoring applications, continuing education and training opportunities, and a lot more. Florida is setting the national example, as employers now have access to the necessary tools to help them combat heat-related risks in one centralized location. By facilitating the sharing, teaching, and implementation of innovative best practices, our new online resource seeks to revolutionize worker heat safety, not only here in the state of Florida, but across the United States. Florida's unique climate demands a proactive measure to ensure the well-being of employers who are exposed to extreme heat. Through this initiative, we are enhancing worker safety on all job sites of all industries, ultimately creating a safer work environment throughout the state of Florida. We encourage you to visit our website to review basic safety protocols such as acclimation periods, breaks, access to shade, adequate hydration, and local monitoring tools. So please click on your QR code or on the screen to learn a lot more. Here on your screen, you'll see just a small sample of some of the customized on-site trainings courses that we offer. Our trainers are fully certified and qualified experts in their respective fields of safety and health. If you are in need of any safety or health trainings, please do not hesitate to reach out to me and we can schedule a time to come to your facility to conduct these trainings. In addition to our private training offerings, we also offer public training courses, which are unique safety trainings that can be taken conveniently from home or work with our virtual offerings. Some of the trainings that are coming up is respiratory protection, train the trainer for respiratory fit testing, safety inspections, and more. And again, you can scan the QR code to view some of our training offerings that we have scheduled and in order to register for these classes that you may be interested in. As we continue growing and expanding our services, the Florida Chamber Safety Council is partnering with national leading companies providing high-quality safety supplies. We are here as a resource to better provide you with the supplies and the solutions to establish a healthier and safer workplace. If there is anything that you may need, and if you have questions regarding providing certain safety supplies and solutions to your employees, please do not hesitate to reach out to me at any time. Last year, we launched a new membership program for the Florida Chamber Safety Council. We know how difficult it can be for human resources or the head of operations to also juggle safety for the business, which is why the Florida Chamber Safety Council wants to serve as your safety department and partner in staying compliant and keeping your teams safe. You can choose from 3 membership levels: advocate, leader, and champion. Each level includes 24/7 safety support, a safety council orientation, as well as an annual risk evaluation, which is completely confidential. Then, based off of the level of your choosing, you can choose a list of safety training courses that can be taken either in person or virtually. You will always receive a discount on any safety trainings booked in addition to those included within your membership. This membership also saves companies hundreds, if not thousands of dollars every year on safety training costs. So please be sure to check out more on our website and reach out to me directly if this membership program is right for you. Registration is now open for our 2025 Leadership Conference on Safety, Health, and Sustainability that will be held at the Contemporary Resort on May 15th and 16th of 2025. This will be our 5th annual conference, and a conference that you surely do not want to miss as it continues to grow year after year. Scan the QR code on your screen and take advantage of the early bird special to save you on cost to attend. We look forward to having you join us for this amazing event. Without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to turn the program over to Florida Chamber Leadership Cabinet member Ed Falk. Ed is the only attorney in the country confirmed by the U.S. Senate to run OSHA. He is currently a partner at Fisher Phillips and also serves as president of Fisher Phillips Safety Solutions, LLC. Prior to joining Fisher Phillips, Ed was the Assistant Secretary of Labor for Occupational Safety and Health, named by President George W. Bush, serving from April 2006 to November 2008. During his tenure at OSHA, workplace injury, illnesses, and fatality rates dropped to their lowest levels in recorded history. For more than 30 years, Ed has worked in the labor and employment area, focusing on occupational safety and health issues, workplace violence risk assessment and prevention, whistleblower protection, and accident and fatality prevention. He is recognized as one of the nation's leading authorities on occupational safety and health, and is a frequent keynote speaker and lecturer on workplace safety, leadership development, and other labor and employment topics. Ed, thank you so much for lending your time and talent with us this morning. The floor is yours, my friend.
Great. Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody that's on the call here or on the webinar. I just want to start off by just saying thank you for your commitment to safety and health. The fact that you're on the program here indicates to me that you want to have the best safety program you can have. You want to make sure you're in compliance with what is a very important standard. And why I say that's a very important standard is because inevitably hazard communications is one of the top, well, definitely the top 10, but usually it's the top 5 most frequently cited standards by OSHA each year. So it's an important standard. It's one that all the compliance officers are familiar with. They understand what they have, what the employers are supposed to have here, and so it's a good. It's very important that you have this in place. So I didn't notice my ties there kind of clear when I put it on there. So anyway, but we won't worry about that. We all have, but anyway, let's talk about it. Oh, and one other thing, as I said, I appreciate your commitment to safety and health, but I also want to say I appreciate the Florida Chamber's commitment to safety and health for all employees in the entire state. The fact that they have made a commitment to have the safest workplace state in the country is truly demonstrates the Chamber's commitment and its leadership's commitment to safety and health. Also, the fact that they have a safety and health council, you don't see that in other states. The commitment is just not there in a lot of other states. Now, I will say that I understand that I've heard at least 2 states had heard about what Florida was doing and now have addressed that. So have said that they want to do the same thing. So that's and so that once again, it's a win-win situation. Florida's leading the charge here, so to speak, and its commitment. So, and the fact that they do part of their commitment here is putting on what I consider probably one of the top, if not the top, safety conferences in the country. Last May, this past May, we were, I think we had over 600 attendees. And the purpose of the decision was made when we decided we were going to do a conference. It was decided that we weren't going to try to be the largest conference. but we were going to try to be the best conference. And I think that they have achieved that goal. They had Michael Phelps as the keynote this past year. The year before that, it was Mike Rowe with Dirty Jobs. And so they're bringing in the top people in the country to come to speak and talk about this. So let's kind of go ahead and start looking here at the, let's see, we'll just start, oh, here we go. We're going to talk about, as you can see here, we're going to talk about what the purpose and scope is. We're going to first kind of talk there, the second bullet. We're going to talk about the recent revisions to the Hazard Communication Standard. You got to understand, there is what they call it, this is called a global harmonization. So you have here, it is all these countries around the world have a focus or deal with the standard of dealing with hazard communication. And so you have this very focus on improving it. And so they're meeting they're constantly having meetings. So every year, I think they get together, go kind of look at what they put into what's been going on in the area of hazard communication, what different countries are doing, and changes. And that's why. So they actually had this very large update this past year on the global harmonization when they all came together. And I'm trying to remember if it was in Geneva or wherever they met, but it was definitely a focus when they moved and updated the standard. And I'm going to talk about the recent revisions in there just a second. So you're going to have our objectives also as part of it to make sure that you understand what the management and employees' responsibilities in complying with this standard. And then just general requirements. We're going to kind of go into those questions just very generally about chemical hazard classifications and those type of things. And also we're going to talk about the requirements for having an effective safety and health communications program, because those are something we're going to really have to make sure we understand that portion of it. Here's talking about the recent revisions, and there are a couple things here. I mean, they expanded stuff, and I'll talk about this now in a second here as we get into this thing. But they did make some changes that do have some impact on if you're a manufacturer of chemicals, or if you're a laboratory developing chemicals and stuff like that. That kind of is going to some of the stuff is going to impact you. But there are other things there that are impacting all employers. And so and basically their responsibilities to their employees. So starting off here, one of the things I would say in the changes, if you look in the changes that were made this year, or they added a number of different definitions in the definition section. The one that is really important to a lot of employers who probably are not going to know about this or understand that all of a sudden, again, this is the thing dealing with combustible dust. And the definition says combustible dust means finely divided solid particulates of a substance or mixture that poses a flash fire hazard or explosive hazard when dispersed in the air or with other oxidizing media. Why is this important? Well, it's because that we've always had combustible dust out there, but now and the standard generally talked about before these changes, the 2012 standard changes talked about combustible dust, but very generally. And so now we're getting to a much more specific thing. And so why is this important? Because if you do have combustible dust, if you fall within the definition, now you're going to have to determine, what are the hazards to the employees and understand how to address those hazards. And so I think this is going to make it easier for OSHA, particularly when they're doing inspections. If you have a dusty area, if it's, wood dust, plastic, whatever it is, I've dealt with all kinds of combustible dust. Now OSHA is going to be able to cite you on a specific standard, hazard communication standard, instead of just doing the general duty clause if you do have combustible dust. So this is going to add a lot more for employers who are going to have to be looking at this thing. If they do have, the dust that's finally divided solid particulates, you're going to have to make sure that you have something. And that since it covers, once now that you can see that it's covering you, that's going to mean too that you may have to make sure that you have safety data sheets on this material and train employees about that. And also housekeeping is going to be a big issue here, because if you have combustible dust, how you reduce the potential being covered under combustible dust provisions here is that you have to make sure that you're really keeping your housekeeping running effectively, so there is no accumulation of dust. If you can eliminate any, or you can at least reduce the accumulation of dust, where arguably it cannot become combustible, then you're not going to be covered under all this stuff. So that's why I think it's very important to that. So we're going to be looking at that. They also added a section on what liquids are. I'm not going to get into that. They also talked about physicians or other licensed healthcare professionals, kind of expanded the definition of what was covered under that. And they also added this one thing, which I thought was, when I first saw it, I thought it was kind of interesting: the immediate outer packaging as a definition. Well, that ties into the labeling portion of the changes in the thing. So if you have a small packaging that's and they're packed in a with a number of they're kind of bulk packaged. The outer package and the immediate outlet is going to have certain information that's going to be covered. We'll talk about that in just a second there. So looking more at what else came under the new definition here. What I just talked just a second ago, small container labeling. And the nice thing, the good thing about for employers, because some of the stuff says, geez, Ed, I can't do all this stuff. And they say, well, I understand, but fortunately for you as an employer, if you're not a distributor, you're not a manufacturer, you're not an importer, then you don't have to worry about all that stuff, because that's what the responsibility is on those people. Now, but the smaller container labeling does require that if it's a smaller container, you still have to do the product identifier, the pictograms, the signal words, and we're going to get all of this stuff, the chemical manufacturer's name and phone number, and a statement, basically what the hazard is. And that's all on the outer packaging. So, that's what that part of that was changed to add some of the stuff that they didn't have before. So, if they have a really small packaging, then the label really only has to have the product identifier information on that stuff. There was also here, let's see, on the update the hazard. Let's see, physical hazard, better use it, safe handling of explosives. It doesn't. Where is it there? About the, I know I have it there. Oh, the number 2 bullet there. Ensure trade secrets are no longer preventing employees and first responders from receiving critical information. Under the standard, when it was changed in 2012, it did talk about, it kind of gave a lot more trade secret protection. This kind of the new changes in this year now kind of open it up a little, some to a certain point. What it does says is, if you're claiming a trade secret, and usually trade secrets are what percentage of the chemicals in there, because you could have the chemicals there, but if you don't know the percentage, it's really hard to duplicate a particular substance. So that may be fall within a trade secret, and that's why they were trying to protect the employers that had trade secrets on their products from having to disclose too much information. Well, now you have to provide a little bit more information. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a big thing, but it does say so. But what it does is you have to show what chemicals are still in there. But now you have a whole series. It's listed in the standard now. It's from A to M, however that many that is. And so if a particular substance has 0.1% to 1%, you're going to have to identify that in that category. So, and that goes all the way up from 80% to 100%. So depending on what chemicals you have there and what is the percentage of it, you're going to have to put that information on there. But once again, they're putting this broad, well, it's not real broad, because like I say, they got a bunch of different delineations here. But it does say, okay, you want to have that information available here, but if a certain amount. And why this is important is because people do get, sometimes they swallow chemicals, or they're somehow exposed to chemicals and they have an allergic reaction or whatever. And the doctors and the treating physicians and the medical people that are maybe on your site, they need to understand what's the exposure, and they're going to at least now know a broad percentage of it. Now, the standard did change one other thing. If it determines if the treating physician determines that there's a medical emergency exists, then the employer can request from the chemical manufacturer importer shall ask for the disclosure of the specific chemical identifiers or percentage compositions for the trade secret chemical that to be for the treating doctor. So this is definitely a broader expansion of what employers can get, and therefore employees who are sick can get more information. Now, in non-emergency situations, the chemical manufacturer, the importer, or the employer is required to disclose specific chemical identifiers, concentrations or concentration range is what we were talking about there. So they can go ahead and deal with that. So there are some time periods. They talk about substances too. That was another thing that they changed a little bit. And so but this doesn't really impact regular employers, but it does impact chemical manufacturers and importers or distributors. They have to be in compliance with the evaluating the new. They have to go and do a more detailed evaluation, and that all has to be done by January 19, 2016. Also, chemical manufacturers, importers, distributors must evaluate their mixtures and make sure they're all in compliance with all the new requirements. And all that has to be done by July 19, 2027. And then the training, employers then have to update their training on all the information that they have, like changes to the labeling, the hazard changes to hazard communication requirements, changes to the SDSs, safety data sheets, all that. So you're going to have to redo your training to make sure you cover all those things. And that's going to be done by January 19, 2028. So we do have time there with respect to meeting the requirements, the new requirements under the standard. So you can see here what some of this stuff we talked a little bit about, that updating the physical hazard classifications, and we're going to go into those too. Some updated the precautionary statements on how to safely handle, store, and dispose of hazardous chemicals. And then, like I said, this really hasn't changed because there were some minor changes after 2012 before these, what I would say, more than minor changes that came in 2024. So that's kind of where we are on that. So let's go ahead. All right. So the purpose of the hazard communication standard is to ensure that all chemical products are imported are classified, and that information concerning the classified hazard, I think explaining what is the hazard here, is transmitted to the employers, and then their responsibility is to transmit it to the employees. So you're going to have to get the classification. We're going to talk a little bit more about classifications in 1 second, but so you're going to have to make sure you understand what the classification of this particular chemical, and that's going to tell you how hazardous the chemical is and how it could impact your employees. So next, the scope requires the employees to provide information to their employees about the hazardous chemicals, so to which they're exposed, and so that these are the different things how that information is transferred. Obviously, the hazard communication or HAZCOM, it goes by program, what is in there. Labels and other forms of warnings are going to be all part of this thing. Safety data sheets and information and training. Now, I think I have a slide on. I know I have a slide on this a little bit later, but I'm going to mention this right now. With respect to the safety data sheets. Now, these changed. It used to be called material safety data sheets. And then in 2012, they went to safety data sheets, added all these sections that are going to be on the safety data sheet. They went from, it used to be, most safety data sheets prior to 2012 were maybe 2-3 pages long. after 2012, where they added all this, I think the 16, 18 different subpart sections that have to be on the safety data sheet. It's now they started out, it's becoming like 8, 10, 12 pages long. So there was a significant jump in the amount of information that you were provided. So, and also I know there's another slide on this thing, but I want to talk about it because it is important and I want to make sure I don't miss this. If you look at 29 CFR 1910 1200, excuse me, 1020, I'm sorry, 1020. This is the medical access. It's called Access to Employee Exposure and Medical Records. And under that standard, you're required to maintain medical records, certain medical records, but you're also required to maintain exposure records, whatever information that exposure to your employees. Well, the safety data sheet, and before that, the MSDS sheets were considered exposure records under 1910-1020. And so we're required to keep that information for 30 years. Now, I know you've been getting, well, back starting in 2012, and I started telling my clients to make sure they preserve the old ones, the old material safety data sheets. Because why I thought this was important is the old sheets, as I just mentioned to you, were very short. It wasn't they were only 2, 3, 4 pages long at the most under the MSDS. Now, when the safety data sheets came out, all of a sudden they started jumping to 10, 20, excuse me, 10, 12, 15 pages long. So there's a lot more information there. Well, why is that important? Well, that's because it's important because now you have knowledge because you have them with safety data sheets of more information on the hazards. And also there was a much more focused starting in 2012 as to what were the hazards. And so they had to meet all the requirements, there's 16 or 17 different parts they had to fill out. You start digging in, they started digging in, the manufacturers had to start digging in, the exporters had to make sure that information was there. So now we identified more, as a result of this, we identified more hazards or degrees of hazards or all kinds like that. So you say, well, why is that important? Well, because there's a lot of chemicals out there that people are exposed to. Now let's just take one, asbestos, okay? Asbestos, we have the asbestos standard, and we're supposed to maintain certain records on that there. But part of it is if you have a substance that has asbestos in it, you're going to have you might be exposed. Well, asbestos, obviously, what causes the hazard of asbestos is asbestosis, breathing in the lungs, the fibers in the lungs. But there are other chemicals there that had substances in there where the development of the disease associated with that chemical might be 15, 20, 25 years later. And so you, back then, when you were using this stuff, you were then, you didn't know of those hazards. But come 2012, all of a sudden, all these hazards were noted in the safety data sheets. So now you do have knowledge of that stuff. So somebody becomes, and why am I talking about this? The main point is here, you didn't have knowledge before 2012. A lot of times about chemicals hazards that you had to and you're keeping for 20 to 30 years, 30 years requirement maintained under 1020. And so if somebody develops some type of a disease as a result of exposure to those chemicals, but it comes out 25 years later, well, now at that point in time, you can say, well, before you expose those people to those things, the answer would be, well, we didn't know that there was a hazard there because it wasn't on the material safety data sheets. We didn't have that information. Now, when we found out that information, when the change came in 2012 and it was safety data sheets, and it was more, there was that, as we were identified, now we started addressing it. But if you don't maintain those logs, if you don't maintain the MSDSs, that would go back, and you're supposed to, you're required to maintain them. You might, what's probably a lot of employers did, hopefully none of my employers, my clients didn't, because I kept preaching this a lot, keep your MSDSs, because you want to be able to show that you really didn't have a knowledge of this hazard at that point when they were exposed. Because they may have been exposed 25 years ago. They may have worked for 5 years with you and then have been gone for 10, 15 years. Well, you don't, and now they're suing you because of they said they're exposed. Well, getting rid of the MSDSs throws away our evidence and is actually a violation of the 1020 standard. So we really want to, so whenever you get a new whenever you get a new safety data sheet, save the old safety data sheet. And if you have any material safety data sheets still hanging around, please keep them, because you're going to need those to be able to justify that. So, all right, so let's go ahead here. Obviously applies to chemicals known to be present in the workplace. It applies to where employees have the potential for exposure. Look at this, under normal conditions or foreseeable emergencies. Now that things become a little gray here when you get to the question about what's a foreseeable emergency. So we need to be watching out that. So, but look at that last bullet, it's very important. Employers with even one hazard chemical and one employee are covered under the standard. So that's important to recognize that too. So, all right, and so we do have a section here talking about laboratories, and I'm just going to go real over here. That laboratories, they have to maintain, to keep the labels, maintain the safety data sheets, make sure they're readily available, which you still have to do under general standard, but they do have some requirements. If you're a laboratory and you're manufacturing, if you're creating and then manufacturing chemicals, then you need to make sure you have that and do the things you need to do to be able to produce a safety data sheet. So, all right. So, and even when we have sealed containers, we still have to have the labels. We have to ensure that the labels are not removed or defaced. And this is this comes under one of my, I have a list, a sheet. I have the OSHA's low-hanging fruit. And I use this as I saying, this is what the compliance officers could use, and go through that sheet. And half the things that are on that sheet, and the compliance officers are going to find at most employers. So they could just have all kinds of citations just using the sheet. But this is one of them there, is that if labels being removed or defaced. This is because all they got to do is look. They go and say, all right, where do you keep your hazardous chemicals? Well, we have them stored over here. Okay, and they look and they can see, they're removed or defaced. And then they're going to say, well, let me look at your safety data sheet book. You have to have a book there, so to make sure that you have a safety data sheet for each chemical that you have there, and you should have a list there. That's another thing, please. The standard requires you're required to have the safety data sheets there, but you're also required to have a list of the chemicals in the front. So compile a list of all the chemicals you have, hazardous chemicals you have, and put it on a list. Stick it in front of the front part of your material or your safety data sheet manual or booklet, whatever how you keep them, and then it's there. But I promise you, these are kind of the low hanging fruit stuff. Well, they didn't have a list. They had all the chemicals, SDSs, but they didn't have the list of chemicals. And it might be an other than serious. It may even be a zero penalty. Not likely, but it may be $1,000. But you save $1,000 here, $1,000 here. Becomes real money, except to my 11-year-old daughter. So anyway, so we want to make sure we want to make sure it's not defaced. We want to make sure that we have the safety data sheets, because if OSHA comes in there, particularly if they're coming here on a complaint based on hazardous chemicals, not being exposed to hazardous chemicals and not knowing about it, you better have them. You better be able to show that you have the SDSs and they're readily accessible. And we'll talk a little bit more about the information here. So. And we have to do the training. So we'll talk a little bit more about, we'll get into training too, but we'll actually talk a little bit more about getting into the more detail about safety data sheets itself. So now there are certain things that are exempt, and you need to look at this stuff here, see if any of this stuff applies to your operation. For most employers, it doesn't. I mean, some does, but if you got pesticides, that's going to be covered under the Federal Insecticide Act. Chemical substances or mixtures comes under the Toxic Substance Control Act. I would say, though, that once again, these recent revisions talk a little bit more about what is a mixture and what is covered under mixture. So we're going to have to see how that fleshes out with respect to, as we go along, how OSHA starts citing those type of things. Food additive, color additives are under FDA, so they're exempt. Cosmetics, medical vet devices all are exempt. Distilled spirits, obviously they fall in the Federal Alcohol Administration Act. Consumer products, assuming that they're being used in a way that is used by consumers, because there is a little wiggle room there for pulling out those consumer products under thing. But and there's a lot of defense on that. They say, well, I mean, I've raised this issue a lot of times. Said, I'm sorry, we're not covered. Our product here is not covered because it's a consumer product. And but then again, they say, well, but if you're not using it like you use it as a consumer, that pulls you out of the exemption. So agricultural, vegetable seeds, those type of things are once again going to be exempt. Hazardous waste and substances obviously falls under a different federal standard. Tobacco and tobacco products, all that's exempt there, do not apply. Wood products, articles. Articles kind of, that becomes once again, this is one of the gray areas, articles. When you get into articles, you really have to look at the standard. You really have to look at the analysis on what the articles are made and how can they be exposed. Articles, I think a lot of what we're going to see with respect to the combustible dust, this is where that will probably come out of. Articles will be ones that are developing into are causing combustible dust, so we need to be looking at that there. Food and alcoholic beverages are exempt, and so are drugs. So anyway, so does not apply to cosmetics. Consumer products, we talked about it, nuisance particulates, and ionized or non-ionized radiation and biological hazards. And so these are, once again, those are exempt from there, but sometimes they can be pulled in. Like I say, the new changes kind of expanded some definitions, which I think are going to, as we'll have to see how OSHA is going to start reacting to pulling certain things to be covered under that. So, because you always had that situation where OSHA wants to be able to cite somebody, and they, so they want to expand what the definition covers and everything else. So here's what we're going to talk about now: hazard classification, written programs, labeling, SCS employee training. So let's keep going because we got a few things to do. All right, what's a hazardous chemical? That's probably a good thing to start with too, because if you don't know what a hazardous chemical is, you don't know if you're really covered under it, and therefore whether the standard applies. And we've listed pretty much what is covered. We're getting a little bit more detail on some of these things. The physical hazards, any chemical has a physical hazard, health hazard, a simple asphyxiant, combustible dust, we talked about, pyrophoric gases, and hazards not otherwise classified. So we'll get into this a little bit more detail here. What's a physical hazard? Well, this is what OSHA kind of gives the definition, or kind of follows on what they would classify as one. And so if we have explosives, oxidizers, self-reactants, pyrophoric liquids or solids, we'll talk about that in more detail in a second. Self-heating, organic peroxides, corrosive to metals, gas under pressure, emits flammable gas when can come in contact with water and flammable gases. So you can see we have a lot of different things that are going to be considered a physical hazard chemical, okay? Or a chemical that's classified as a physical hazard. So health hazards, once again, I think a lot of this stuff is pretty straightforward, and I would figure that it's a little bit, I think that you can say, yeah, these are things you're going to see. So chemical that is classified. And once again, now remember, both with respect to safety hazard or health hazards, you're going to know what that is because it's on their safety data sheet. They got to have that information on the safety hazard. So you're going to have to see it there. So you're going to be able to see it. Is it a corrosive? And say, well, and sometimes it's not as clear as a corrosive, but and how I have to do when I'm dealing with these type of things, I kind of look at there's a section that deals with what's the pH. Well, if you're at a 7 or 8, you're basically a neutral. If you're at a 1, you're a corrosive, high hazard corrosive. If you're at I'm trying to remember, is it 10 or 12? 7, I think must be 12. You're at a high base. Either one can cause some serious health hazards and can burn the skin and stuff like that. So we need to be looking at that. So we're looking at corrosiveness. If it can cause serious eye damage or eye irritation. Once again, this information is going to be in the SCSs. So the manufacturers or the importers or the have the responsibility to put that information on the labels. Your responsibility to make sure at the SDSs, and it's going to be, some of it's going to be on the labels too, but the SDSs will have this information. So you need to be aware of that. So your responsibility is make sure you get the SDSs. When you get new chemicals, you need to make sure you get that, put it in your book, make sure you make a copy, whatever you're going to do. So, but you can see all these different other types of health hazards that can be could injure one of your employees from that particular chemical. So that's why they're identifying these safety hazards, health hazards. All right. So we know exactly what we're dealing with here. Pyrophoric gas, anything that ignites spontaneously at a temperature of 130 degrees Fahrenheit or below. So we have those. And now this is not something you see a lot I don't get into a lot. I've never had a lot of this. I've had a couple of times where I've had this situation, and when you're dealing with it, you obviously want to make sure that it's staying, you want to keep it, cool so it doesn't explode. So, simple asphyxiants, substance or mixture that displaces oxygen in ambient atmosphere and can cause oxygen deprivation of those who are exposed, which leads to unconsciousness or death. I had a case, oh God, now it's probably been about 4 years ago now, 5 years ago. It was a case that became a state countrywide focus. My client actually was not where the employees died or did not own the facility at the time. They came in and purchased it after the accident. So but then here, you have where they were using nitrogen to cool down or freeze food, and there was a nitrogen leak. It's really, you don't smell it. It's not you don't smell it, and it's not like a colored gas where you can see something's happening. So and so they ended up having, I think it was 7 people died because all of a sudden they just started collapsing. And unfortunately, some of their co-workers saw it, and they go into this room to help them, to rescue them, and they end up collapsing and dying. So that was a very tragic type of thing. Like I said, I was glad it wasn't my client. That they didn't come into afterwards, but I had to deal with the remnants of that case. So we need to make sure we identify those things and figure out how we're going to make sure so the employees know what is there and that it's properly labeled and they can protect themselves there. So hazard not otherwise classified. This is kind of a catch-all. It was put in there as a catch-all. Any adverse physical or health effect identified through evaluation of scientific evidence during the classification process that doesn't fall within the specific physical health hazards though. So that they're falling below a certain concentration, but yet it is still a hazard. So it falls under that. You don't see, to be quite honest, you don't see too many people and this coming up very often and being cited. So, all right. So now we're getting into what's the hazard classification? And so each hazard has its own hazardous class. And what you can see here, what's acute toxicity is just one of the many hazardous classes that they're out there. So what it does, they're also, and then they're divided into degrees of severity. So you have a hazardous classification. I've been dealing with one this week for another client that was dealing, which had these chemicals in a system, and it's a sanitizing chemical. And so the question becomes here, that classification, the chemical itself was classified as a hazardous category. It was in the hazardous category. It was a category 1, which is the most hazardous you can get. It can cause, in this particular case, this thing could cause skin burns, could cause eye burns to the eyes, those type of things. And so it was category 1. Category 2 is usually a little bit less severe. So it's important to know what the classification is. Now here we're trying to claim that it might be a category 1 now, but by the time it's used, but because it's diluted in the process, that when it actually becomes once it could potentially expose an employee, it's no longer category 1, more category 2. So it's not a hazard. Well, I would consider a hazard. So we'll see how that plans out. But you have to make that argument here. So it's important that you understand what you have. If you have category 1 chemicals, I would say you really need to look at those and determine how you're going to eliminate those. Okay. How are we going to eliminate those category 1 chemicals with a safer chemical? And there's a lot of chemical companies out there that are doing this exact thing. They're looking at their chemicals that they're providing to their clients and trying to find out new, different substitutes for this. I don't know if you've seen that commercial on television. I think it's a spray for some odors or something like that. And and it gets rid of odors, and you spray it on it, it gets rid of it. But then you get the guy there spraying the chemical in his mouth. Not that I would recommend that. So, but anyway, but it's now showing that, hey, this is not harmful to it's not going to be harmful to humans, but it's not going to be harmful to your employees. So you need to be moving that. And this is something that most businesses, I can't say all businesses, but most businesses have been attempting to do, is to move from a category 1 hazardous chemical to at least a category 2. Because once again, it protects you, it's protecting your employees, and so we really want it. But one of the things you should do when you finish up this program is get your get your safety data sheet book and look at them under the classification. What categories do they fall in? If you find any category 1s, you need to call whoever your chemical manufacturer is, whoever you're buying your chemicals from. You need to say, hey, we're using this chemical, it's category 1. What do you have at least that's less severe, maybe a category 2? So, and so you can make that, because we want to protect our employees. We don't want to have an exposure of our employees. And if you can get the reduction to a category 2, then there's a good chance you're not going to be cited for anything like that. So we need to be looking at that very carefully when we finish up here, to go and see what chemical you should know. What category 1 chemicals do we have at our work site, and what can we replace that with? Because more than likely there is a replacement for it. So, all right, here you can see the different health categories going from 1 to 4. And we can see the classes here, all these different types of classes. I'm not going to go into that. We talked a little bit about it, but you can kind of see here where, what is their category? Is it 1A, 1B, or is it 2? We obviously want to get to 2 at a minimum, but more likely we'd like to get to 3 or 4 as a health has category, because then it's not a severe category. It's not a severe chemical that could dramatically impact your employees. So, all right. Okay, and here's an Appendix B. They talk about physical criterias, physical hazard category, and you can see the different ones here. Now, most of what you see on the flammable gas, you're going to see, the explosive 1s and 2s. For certain chemicals, you're going to see type A, type B, type C, all those type of things. So you need to be aware. Once again, you need to be looking at what is this, what we have our physical hazard class, we have that. So what category are they in? And so what can we do to make that less hazardous? I mean, that's really what the purpose of, and that's part of what I think is the purpose of the hazard communication standard was to try to develop and to help employers get rid of bad chemicals. And I think it's really worked because, to be quite frank, before there was no incentive to find, you had a chemical and it was working what you needed to do, but it was a category 1. But there was no real, so we got it, we're fine, we're just rolling along as we've been doing for 10 years now, or 20 years, or whatever it is. But now you're going to be saying, okay, we got a category 1 chemical, how do we get to a category 2 or maybe 3 or 4? Because we don't want to have this type of stuff hanging out there on us, and we want to protect our employees. So, all right. The written program. Obviously, it makes it pretty clear that you have to have a written hazard communication employee. Every employer has to have that, and it must be available upon request from their employees or the designated representative, which usually is the union. And of course, it has to be available to OSHA investigators. So now, I would say this too, with respect to inspections, an OSHA inspection. You really need to be focused on what's going on during inspection, because there's a lot of inspectors out there that have what I call it the checklist. And it's, it's a kind of a cheat sheet, so to speak, because it tells you, it just goes through each one of the standards. And so the inspector, even though the inspection may be based on one thing, now they go through their list and they start asking for all this other stuff that technically they're not entitled to. So during an inspection, you need to, right at the beginning, if you have a complaint inspection, you need to ask for a copy of the complaint because you're entitled to that. And then you need to ask, what is the scope of this inspection? So you can limit it. Get a copy of the complaint. You're entitled to that. Most employers don't know this, but they're entitled to get a copy of the complaint, of an inspection. What is the basis? Because that tells you exactly what they're entitled to look at. That tells you the scope of that inspection. So if it's not a inspection based on some type of claim that there's been hazardous chemicals and they've not been trained or whatever, you don't have the right SDSs or whatever it is, they may not be able to get into that particular, into the hazard communication standard in order to be able to cite you for those things. Now, if it's a wall-to-wall inspection, if it's a a national emphasis program or a local emphasis program, and they're doing wall-to-walls, then you're kind of out of luck because they can basically ask for whatever they want to ask for. So you need to be willing to push back on certain things, because there really is some things that they're not entitled to. Sorry, but you need to understand that. And here, once again, if the complaint that they're coming in and doing an inspection on has nothing to do with hazard communications or hazardous chemicals, then guess what? We're not going to be providing that information, because once you provide the information, you open the door and now you've expanded that inspection. Okay. And that's not a good thing. Promise you that. So anyway. All right. Program must talk about the labels and warnings. We're going to get safety data sheets, information training, list of chemicals. Remember that list of chemicals there we talked about? We want to make sure that must contain methods to inform employees of hazards associated with non-routine tasks. We have certain things here that we normally do that employees are going to be doing on a regular basis. And then we do have some tasks that are not routine, but they do that. And we need to understand that, okay, but it does occur from time to time. If it doesn't happen anytime, or it doesn't happen once every 20 years. Well, now we're talking about that's not a non-routine task. But We just need to be aware of those things. So, because we need to identify what is those hazards associated with those non-routine tasks, and what are the associated. So the written plan must talk about these, and we also need to, here, look at this last bullet, hazards associated with chemicals contained in unlabeled pipes. If you have chemicals in your plant and they're in pipes, you probably need to label them. You really need to be able to point to say, hey, we know exactly what's in there, and we've training our employees on that particular, it might be hydrofluoric acid. If you have on process safety management, you get that type of thing, particularly in the refineries and when they're breaking down the oil chemicals and stuff like that. But you want to make sure that all those pipes are labeled, because you're going to have some potential exposure there of people when they're working around those things. So written code must also talk about the multi-employer workplaces where you have multiple employers. And so when you have vendors and contractors coming in here and doing things, particularly if there are contractors that are doing servicing and maintenance and stuff like that, and they're coming in there. So we need to make sure that part of our written program talks about what information we need to provide people coming into our site to perform work. Now, if they're visitors or guests, that's a whole different thing. But it's you still have a lot of times where you're dealing with people who have coming in, working in the project. They're doing, most of the time it's going to be maintenance. Sometimes it may be rehab, construction, stuff like that. So, but we need to make sure that they understand that. They need to understand. Part of our program must talk about the SDS, where the SDSs are, and what access and what information is available, and make sure our labeling system is in place too. So, when they when traveling between workplaces or work shifts, you keep your HAZCOM program at your primary location. Now, some employers actually do put books together that has the program itself generally, and then it has safety data sheets on chemicals that they most likely would be using outside of the work site when they're traveling, doing work someplace else. So, and that's a good thing to do, but you have to keep, at least the main program has to be kept at least in the workplace, the primary workplace there, where the employees start work, or maybe they don't do it. Maybe they're starting work someplace else or whatever, but they have to have at least one place. It's just kind of like record keeping. Every employee has to have a base facility for their injuries and illnesses. Okay. So same thing here. So, all right, now we're talking about labeling here, and you see a copy of a label right there. There's certain information that has to be kept on, must be there for the information on the label, and attached to the container, so that or outside packaging. But you also have there's also labeling or that is done by HMIS or NFPA, National Fire Protection Association. They have their own system. Used to see more of that. I'm seeing really employers getting away from that, or they're doing both systems. They have both systems in place. So, like I say, the label must be in English and be prominently displayed. These are the things you're going to have. Product identifier, what this product is. Signal words, we'll talk about that. Hazard statements, pictogram, precautionary statements, and then the information, name, address, and phone number of the manufacturer and importer. And that's important because, I will tell you this right now. I'm not sure when the last time I had to do this, but it does come up fairly often that you need that information. You got, particularly if somebody's being exposed to a chemical and they're claiming a trade secret, you need to be able to call the manufacturer or importer and say, hey, what's in this stuff? So, because we got an employee that's really sick. The new changes to this makes that even easier for the employer and the employee get that information, which before was kind of hard to get. But we need to make sure that they do have the name and address on that there, so. Um, once again, this is the harmonized information. In other words, what they were before, particularly even before 2012, there were a bunch of different signal words. So, but they basically now have gotten down to where we only have two signal words: danger and warning. Okay, and danger is obviously used for the more severe hazards. Warning is used for less severe hazards. Once again, you're as an employer, you're just getting the safety data sheets and the labels, and that information has already been determined by the chemical manufacturer or or the exporter, whatever, importer, whatever. So, but these are what they settled on, the two warnings that they have. So obviously, if you see danger here, once again, maybe as we're going through all this stuff, we're making sure we're looking at, okay, how can we reduce the hazards associated with the work that they're doing? Well, if you got a bunch of chemicals that you're using that say danger, maybe it's time to figure out what chemicals might be out there, because they're inventing new chemicals all the time. And a lot of employers, well, this is the chemical we've been using for 25, 30 years. So that's what we're going to stick with. Well, and not ask the question, well, is there another chemical out there that could be used better that would not be so hazardous? So anyway, let's keep going. We got a lot to do yet here. Hazard statements assigned to the hazards class and category, the nature of the hazard, including here, see, harmful if inhaled, for category 4 acute toxicity inhalation. You can see here the pictograms, the signal words, danger or warning. And now you can see what the hazard statements. These are all the things that are going to be on the label. Okay. And you need to make sure that we're looking at these. And if you got something that has a skull and crossbones on it, you better be, once again, looking at trying to figure out what we can do to change that chemical out so we don't have that particular hazard for our employees. Pictograms, I always liked these. I mean, when these kind of came in, they basically came in 2012. So they were informative. They were kind of out there. There were some out there that were there, but and then others then they really kind of got picked. They finalized on it. OSHA finalized on the ones that they wanted, and then that's what we have there. So, and there are 9 pictograms. I thought they were going to add some more with the recent changes, but they did. And but so 8 of the pictograms are designated under particular categories that fall within the standard itself. The environmental one is not used by OSHA for obvious reasons. Now it's on there. It's going to be on the label, and so you need to be aware of that. And because the manufacturers of the chemicals are putting as much information as can to protect themselves. So so even the environmental one too, I think you're seeing more focused on that. So. And here's a picture of all the 9 things here. This one here, the environmental one down here at the bottom, in the middle. They're talking about aquatic toxicity there, water, maybe air, stuff like that. But let's look at the other ones here. The health hazards has the focus there on the chest, something in the chest. So these are what you're seeing there, these type of hazards that, and once again, the pictograms are intended to kind of have that anybody can look at them, and doesn't have to be in English, because everyone will know they'll see these things and they'll understand that. So obviously, if it has a flames, then it's some type of flammable, self-heating, those type of things. The exclamation point kind of talks about irritants, skin sensitizers, toxicity, those type of respiratory tract irritants. So once again, you just can look at the pictogram, i.e. here in the red box, and know what you're dealing with. gas cylinder, gas under pressure, corrosive, skin corrosive, burns, eye damage, corrosive to metals, exploding bomb, explosive, self-reactive, organic, oxidizers. And once again, you don't deal a lot, but they are out there. There's no doubt about it because I deal with them from time to time. And I said about the skull and crossbones, talks about acute toxicity. And then this is the one that is being exempt, is not being used by OSHA at this particular point in time. And I don't think they will be using it. It's definitely used by EPA. So, all right, precautionary statements. We talked about that. Once again, that's going to be on our labels. Phrase that recommends measures that should be taken to prevent or minimize adverse effects. Here's some on explosive. Keep away from heat, spark, open flames. Keep wetting with water, whatever. Ground bonding, container, receive equipment. Do not subject to grinding or shock. Wear face protection. All these type of things are precautionary statements that an employee can utilize to protect themselves from the hazards associated with that particular chemical. So, let's see. I can say that we're still doing a lot of harmonization on that. And the picture words, the signal words, pictograms, the hazard statements, you're seeing now much more push to get all that information. But once again, we want to make sure we keep those old material safety data sheets to protect ourselves down the road. So, I think we got it there. Here's what you see from a label. This is what kind of things you would see. Has the company chemical name, has the case chemical case number, the hazard statements, precautionary statements, and then it has the pictograms there that tells you there what is the particular hazard you want to make sure you're avoiding there. Solid materials, wood, plastic items not exempt as articles. There is a provision in the standard that talks about exempting articles. I'm just trying to think of what we had examples of this one here. But notice this, technically, you have all these things where the labels are sent with, well, either they're on the container itself, or if they're shipped with the container, then they're provided that thing. And so they're usually adhesives on the back, so you can just kind of pull off the paper and stick it on there. But they're required, the manufacturers, the exporters, those people are required to have that information, send that information to the employer that's getting the shipment. Now, there is times that I have this happen, unfortunately, more than it should, that they don't get a label or something like, well, you just need to then call them up, or call up whoever's delivering your stuff, wherever you're getting your chemicals from, call them up and say, hey, I don't have a, first of all, I don't have a label. And for this chemical, so can you please send me that? And they got these labels all the time. I mean, I ask for clients for labels all the time. So don't be surprised about that. And then sometimes they forget to include the safety data sheets. So you need to make sure you have it, because that's your responsibility, is to have those. If you don't have it, you can't say, well, the manufacturer never sent it to me. Well, did you ask them for it? No, I didn't ask them for it, but they're supposed to ship it on the first shipment. And we looked for it, it wasn't there. Well, guess what? Too bad. You still have that responsibility. So don't try to pawn it off on the fact that, but you do need to make a call. As a general rule, they were not going to avoid that. They're not going to want to get into that type of pissing match, so to speak, on who's supposed to give the labels. So you just need to know, if the manufacturer fails to, or the importer fails to send the labels, then you better go ahead and get it yourself, because you're going to get cited for it if you don't have it. So anyway, so here's the, solid labels. And like I said, there's some change about this, particularly when it came to this, combustible dust. I think this is getting away from the solid materials. So we'll see. Yeah, like I said before, you have to each hazardous chemical container must be labeled, tagged, or marked with the information required on the shipping tab. Product words, symbols, which product general information regarding the house. Now, I would note there is a provision. You see this little container here. It's not a manufacturer's produced bottle sprayer. It's probably the company's sprayer there that they had bought a bunch of bottles and put chemicals in it. So we need to make sure that this stuff now this would come under a potential requirement that we have products that are properly labeled. Now there is the exemption. I think I'm hoping it's the next slide. I'll show you. Yeah, here's the upper. Your exemption for labeling. As you can see here, there's no label on that bottle up there. Okay. And so, but if you have a portable container that's intended for immediate use, now there's all kinds of used to be a lot of case law on that. I think it's pretty much settled now. That said, you could what was immediate use? That was always the question. What's immediate use? Well, here and this is what it basically shook out. It's under the control of the employee, used only by an employee, and it's finished within the work shift of the transfer from the time of the transfer when you're transferring from a barrel or container to a large container to this smaller container, then that's immediate use, and you use the whole thing up. That was one of the things that used to talk about there, but there was a lot of case law discussion about that for a while. But they really come down to this thing. So you want to make sure if OSHA comes in and then all of a sudden they're citing you, say, well, you didn't have your spray bottles labeled. Well, your response needs to be, well, we use it. That's for immediate use. They only use that when they come in and start the day shift. They go over there, and you can see over there. There's we have our hazardous chemical closet there, and it's fire rated and everything else. But if you open it up, you'll see that there's a number of empty small container bottles in there that are not labeled. That is because when the employees start the day shift, when they come in to start their shift, they get one of those spray bottles, and then they go to where the chemicals are kept, and they fill that bottle up just for the day's work. So, and a lot of times it's I don't know. Some of it's just for cleaning purposes and stuff like that. So you got a lot of housekeeping that have unlabeled bottles but they better be only using that day. And when they're finished, they should, at the end of the day, they should pour all whatever's left away, either back into the container or some way properly dispose of it. But you only want to have that. So we want to make sure that they're doing that. They're using it during their shift, and it's only one person using it. And it's under their control the full time. So this still comes up. I mean, you still have the problem. I can go. I do a lot of OSHA inspections, and I promise you this. That's one thing that when I do the walk around, my personal walk around before OSHA shows up, if I know OSHA's coming, or they show up one day and we do the opening conference and and they interview a couple of hourly employees. But they come back the next day. Well, before they're coming, when they get there, I'm out there walking the plant. I'm opening every fireproof cabinet, chemical cabinet, whatever it is. And I'm looking just specifically for that. And if I open up a cabinet and I see a situation like that, where you have, and the shift is already, hasn't started, there's no one else around, and they got this, and this is left over from the yesterday's shift. Well, that's a violation. So, I mean, I'm going to point that out. We're going to obviously address that violation right away before the inspection starts again. But you need to know that you can't keep those things overnight. And once again, this is one of the low-hanging fruit things that they can pull up and just kind of go after you on that. So let's keep going. We got some more here. All right, the safety data sheets. they're required to hit, and here's what, it's 16 sections. Several of the sections, 12 through 15, are not mandatory, but they're on I promise you, every manufacturer of chemicals has all 16 sections as a general rule. So we got what is mandatory. And so if there's nothing they have anything for it, then they can leave it blank. But for the most part, you're going to find, this is what I said before, there was no breakdown. Before 2012, there was no breakdown in the 16 sections. You had your safety data sheet, and they, one manufacturer of the chemicals would look at what other people were doing for their material safety data sheets and basically copy them, or the format at least, and that's why they were just real short. Now you can't be short because you got 16 sections. Maybe a couple of sections are going to be left blank, but still you're going to have a lot of information. So we need to make sure on our safety data sheets. Now, if you haven't changed, if the chemical hasn't changed and you still have the old MSDS, you might want to ask for a safety data sheet. I think it's too long now to claim that, well, we have the original material safety data sheets and therefore there's no issue. But please, once again, don't throw the MSDSs away. Keep them. Put them in a file. Put them in the file cabinet on the bottom drawer. Lock the cabinet drawer, and so if ever it comes up, you can be able to have those. So, all right. So we have the 16 sections on the safety data sheet, and like I said, it's a change from the material safety data sheet to safety data sheet. Here's all the categories there, and as you can see, one of them, you can see why. You can see 12, 13, 14, 15 is non-mandatory. And it's really not, it's not getting into, it's more kind of things that are not connected to what OSHA is really looking at. So, but once again, it's still there. So, this, once again, the manufacturer importer must ensure that the distributors, employers are provided the appropriate SDSs. So when you get a chemical, and normally it's not just the first time you order it. Usually the safety data sheets, and every time you reorder it, they send it to you there. So, but when they update what they're required to send it to you on the initial shipment to you, and whenever they update it. So that's and once again, when you get the new one, get your safety data sheet manual, pull out the old one, put that old one in the file, in the SDS MSDS file, put it in the bottom of the file cabinet, lock it up, and then put the new safety data sheet in your binder. So that's what we want to make sure we do there. So they have to be readily accessible during the worksheet. It can be electronic. You can do it on electronics, and a lot of companies do that. A lot of big companies put all their safety data sheets on one drive and give the employees access. It's sometimes a little bit hard to find that. And that could be problematic if you can't find it when OSHA asks for it, because if they're coming in there and they see something here on a chemical or something, they may kick in and start asking you for all these different things. And one of the things they're going to ask you for is to see your safety data sheet manual, and also that specific safety data sheet for that particular chemical that is kind of an issue now. So we want to do that. But you got to make sure, if you're going to do electronic, you got to make sure the employees know how to pull it up, or that their supervisors have the immediate access. So we've talked about, remember, here's the 1020. I told you about that. We wanted to make sure on that. You got to have your inventory. You got to maintain those records for 30 years. You can say, Jesus, Ed, that's a long time. Yes, it is, but that's the rule. And don't think that the plaintiff's lawyers don't know that rule. So if they find here, and they're going to be asking you if somebody gets some type of exposure to chemical that they end up getting an illness, then you know what? The plaintiff's lawyers are going to be asking you for that. And they're going to ask you, let me see what you had for that chemical before, the current one that you have now. Let's look back. Let's see 30 years of your MSDS that you have for that chemical. So you got to understand this. That's why part of this thing is part of the liability you got to go deal with there. So training has to be done initially. There's no annual training requirements in this standard, which is kind of interesting. I know why it's not, because back in the Reagan administration, they passed what was that? it was the small business. Oh, it had a name. Now I can't remember the name. Anyway, it was intended to protect small businesses from being inundated by regulations. So the regular administration had got the Congress to pass the yeah, it has a specific name. I can't remember right now. But anyway, so you had to kind of downsize your requirements, and you got gold stars if you were able to eliminate record keeping requirements for employers, and particularly small employers. The only bad thing is, and there were a lot of standards that had two things happen: either when they were written subsequent to that act, they didn't even put in training, they didn't put any record keeping requirements in it, and other times now they dropped it. Actually, just a part of the update of the standard, they just dropped the record keeping requirements. That doesn't mean you don't have to keep it, because if you don't keep it, if you don't have it, then you never was done, right? So let's not be fooled into that. So we want to make sure that we keep those that information. We have those the training records to show that they were trained at hiring. They can show that they were trained, and when we added a new substance into the workplace, they were trained when it was needed to clearly have refresher training when they were showed that they didn't understand it. And that's one thing a lot of employers don't do, and I don't know why they don't do, but I recommend this highly to all my clients. If you have somebody who violates a standard, okay, in this particular case, they're talking about, the hazards associated with a chemical there, or not following the protection, what they should be doing. Lockout tagout is another example. This is a different standard, a whole different standard. But if they don't lock out properly, obviously they don't understand the standard, and you should be training them. But unfortunately, when employees are found to don't seem to understand the requirements, what they're supposed to be doing, they receive previous training, then they should be retrained. You can discipline them, yeah, okay. But still part of that discipline should be retraining on that standard, in this particular case, the hazard communication standard, on what they're supposed to do and what they should know about the hazards, and where the safety data sheet are, and the labels, how they should be labels be kept, and everything else. And obviously the training's done at no cost, but if you don't do that, what is how are they going to know to do it right the next time if you don't retrain? So that should always be part. You might want to discipline. Can still discipline people, but if somebody's not following the rules, you better retrain them on whatever standard is applicable. In this particular case, the HAZCOM. You're supposed to provide them information about the requirements of the standard or the section, where the written hazard communication is, where's the list of hazardous chemicals, where's the safety data sheets kept, where's that manual. So and that's one thing. So methods for detecting the presence or release of the chemical, physical health simple hazards associated with it, talking about hazards not classified if you have them. Probably a lot of times most employers don't have those. Measures that employees can do to protect themselves from the chemicals, and explain the labeling system. They should be able to look at the label and be able to know at least some of these things. The pictogram. What does the pictogram tell you? You should be able to tell you that. So, what is it? What is a safety data sheet? Because I promise you, if OSHA asks your employees, hey, you know anything where your safe? They may say where your safety data sheet is. Because a lot of times we talk about SDSs all the time. Oh, this is the SDS manual. This is here's your SDSs. And they don't talk about safety data sheets, and the OSHA ask about that. You better, if you're on the inspection and you're walking around, they say, where's your safety data sheets, and they look at, and the employee has that blank stare. You might want to mention, he's talking about your SDSs. Oh, the SDSs. Yes. It's over here. So that's kind of, it's just the way it works out. So, okay, we're almost finished, I believe, here. So I think we have a little time to do that. Trade secrets, I already talked about that, kind of expanded it now, what they can do on there. So, but on emergencies, you can get that, once again, if it's not emergency, it's not going to be. You have to provide certain information, but if it's an emergency, then you're going to have to do that. So, all right, so we're kind of here at the end here. We've talked about the purpose and scope of the program, the roles, management, employees' responsibilities to comply with the standard, general requirements on hazards, effect of the program. These are the appendices in the standard. We haven't gone into that because, oh, we did have a little bit of some on the health and physical criteria. We did talk a little bit about that and had that pictures there. So, but you might want to follow up on those and just look and see. So, all right. So we got 5 minutes, looks like, left for any questions. But I'm going to just say first, thank again once again to everyone for being here. Appreciate your commitment to safety. Thanks for being concerned about the safety and health of your employees, because it really is important. I mean, you can't run an effective business if you don't have a great safety program. And the more that you improve your safety program, the result is going to be that you're going to be more profitable and competitive. So thanks again for being here.
No, thank you very much, Ed, for that extremely informative presentation for the updates of the HAZCOM standards. So there are a couple questions. One is, hazardous communication has been a continuous top 10 OSHA violation. What is it specifically that OSHA issues these citations for, being that it's in the top 10? What are the most common citations that they issue?
Well, mostly I would say, and I mentioned that about the low-hanging fruit. I think one of the things is not having a chemical list of the hazardous chemicals that you do have.
Mm-hmm.
And that should just be put in the front of the book of your safety data sheet manual or book, whatever you want to call it. So that's probably that's one of the ones that do it. Not having a safety data sheet for a particular chemical. If they really start digging into these things, you can probably find out there's a lot of employers that don't have every safety data sheet they're supposed to have in their binder. So that's one of the others there. Some is coming under training that the employees don't, and that's why I said about because I've had this happen to me several times in clients that OSHA's talking to them about the safety data sheets and they're looking like deers in the headlight. But as soon as you say SDSs, because that's how they got trained, they're going to say, oh yeah, SDSs, yes, we got trained on that. They're over here. So I think that's kind of the things that I see being the most frequently cited there. But yeah, I think that's probably where we're seeing most of it.
So in regards to training, is it required that all employees that are exposed or potentially exposed to any hazardous materials within the workplace, that they have to be trained in the hazardous communication standard and everything that abides by that? All employees, doesn't matter what level of.
Right. If you got one employee and one chemical, you're covered, and you're going to have to make sure that one employee knows everything he needs about the hazardous chemicals in his work. So, some employers focus their training more specifically to the particular chemicals in a particular department. And I think that's, but do a general training on just, safety data sheets, labeling, all that stuff. But just identifying, you're working in this department. Here's the hazardous chemicals that are here. Here's the symptoms of any type of exposure. And here's what should be saying, here's what your PPE is or whatever to protect yourself from that. So I think that's part of what you have to do there. So, yeah.
Do you foresee with this new standard that came effective a couple of weeks ago, be an increase in citations within the OSHA top 10 when it comes to HAZCOM? Do you see this becoming a little bit more frequent as far as citations?
Well, it's already pretty frequent already, but I would say, to me, the thing that I'm concerned for my clients is the chemical dust, or excuse me, combustible dust. That, to me, I think if you're going to see any expansion, it's going to be in that area, because in the past it's always been kind of a general duty clause. Now they got much more ability to cite it under the HAZCOM standard. that you're exposing your employees to combustible dust and you haven't trained them on the hazards associated with that.
Yep,
So
absolutely. Got one here. Unlocked wall-mounted kiosks for all SDSs. Does it work? I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly.
yeah, I'm trying to figure what they're asking.
Unlocked wall-mounted kiosks for all SDS works.
Does it work or is it work?
I think that's the question. I'm not exactly sure. Oh, not asking stating. Oh,
I'm
sorry.
not I'm not sure.
He
I'm not
was
exactly
stating, not
sure.
asking.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they're asking. I would say, unlock kiosks.
Yeah, it was basically he just wrote back saying he wasn't asking. He was stating if it he was stating it does if all has access.
Yeah, I mean, once again, if however you're making sure that the employees have access, and if it's a computer, if it's a kiosk, okay, it's a kiosk. So I've never seen that, so I don't know I don't know how to respond to that. But I would say as long as the employees have access to them and it's not restricted, you know, I guess it'll be okay. So.
And then we have one more question. Can all 30-year SDSs be kept digitally?
Yeah, I don't know why not. No, I mean, a digital, if you can show that, yeah, we just scanned them in here. This is what we had. Yeah, you can do that. I
Okay.
mean, you didn't have that much back in 2012 when I was telling clients that, you better keep these things because you're required to under the 1910, 1020. And so, yeah, I don't know why you couldn't do that.
Okay. Another question has popped up. Do SDS take into consideration or list fume hazards? Hot asphalt, which contains liquid asphalt, steaming up when dumped into the paver hopper.
Yeah, I had a case dealing with asphalt. I'm just trying to remember not too long ago when that was on the hazards associated to and our position was really when the hazard because it was a silica case. That was the question on that one. And there is some silica, but very little. I would say that no, the answer is no. I don't think they're talking. I doubt if the SDSs are capturing that information.
When it comes to hot asphalt, which
Right.
the
For
liquid.
the fumes coming off off of hot asphalt, right?
Okay, fantastic. Is there anybody else that's online here have any additional questions? Oh, here we go. Only digital limitations for safety docs comes when you have HIPAA related docs and your system is not HIPAA compliant.
Yeah, I understand that. I would say, well, I'm not a HIPAA expert. I stick to OSHA, and we have a bunch of lawyers here. That's all they do. So God bless them. But um, I would say here, I would say you would be correct if it, but I don't think it's HIPAA deals with medical records, and this is an exposure record. There's a distinction in 1020. So I don't think that the SDSs would fall under a HIPAA coverage because it's not a medical record. So information like that, but it's not a medical record. So,
Ooh, gotcha.
but I'm not an expert on HIPAA, so I'd have to defer to one of my illustrious colleagues that know more about this, which is not hard than I do, which is not hard, but so.
Ooh, you went great. Another question, just for everyone to know, I've got a few of these questions. Yes, this presentation has been recorded and it will be emailed to you, to all the people that have registered by the end of the week. So you will get this presentation emailed to you. So just, and of course, if you have any questions in regards to this, or needing any safety trainings when it comes to HAZCOM, as Ed was saying, that OSHA requires the employees that are exposed or even potentially exposed to a specific type of chemicals within the workplace, that they have to be trained of the hazardous communication standards. So, and that's something that we are here to help you with. So if you have any questions, you have any needs, please, feel free to reach out to me at any time. And again, Ed, I just want to say thank you so much, for taking the time today and giving this presentation. It was extremely informative, and I'm sure that everybody else here, also agrees that it was extremely informative to help them be much safer, first and foremost, and then of course be in compliance with the new standards. So, Ed, thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
Yep, happy to do it. Thanks again for everybody being on the call. Thanks for your commitment to safety, and thanks to the Chamber for their commitment to safety.
Absolutely. And everybody online, thank you again so much for your time this morning and joining us. And again, if there's anything that we can do to assist you and be a resource for you, please don't hesitate to give us a shout anytime. Stay safe out there, and God bless you and your families.
Yep.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.